Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. After 28 matches, Spurs are just 4 points above the relegation zone. So could they actually get relegated for the first time in almost 50 years? And how would Championship football impact a club of Tottenham's size? All right, in with us today, we've got David Ornstein. We've also got Jay Harris as well. All right, let's get some facts on the table, gentlemen. Spurs are currently 16th in the Premier League, just 4 points above West Ham, who are in 18th. They've taken 12 points from their last 19 games. Jay, you know where I'm going here. This looks like relegation form. Could Spurs actually go down?
Doesn't look like relegation form. It is relegation form. Let's just say what it is. Of course they could go down. I think one of the reasons why Spurs decided to get rid of Thomas Frank and bring in Igor Tudor was because Tudor has a proven track record of going into teams at a crisis point in the season. It's done with Lazio, Udinese, Juventus, and sparking a really quick turnaround. But his first couple of weeks in charge, that hasn't happened. They've lost 2 games. And I think more concerningly than the losses is just the performances in those games. A 4-1 defeat at Arsenal, 2-1 against Fulham at the weekend. And the defending was comical, abysmal, slapstick at times against Fulham. So 2-1 sort of flattered Spurs. And it sounds ludicrous to say, but it's true. We're in a situation where if Spurs lose to Crystal Palace on Thursday evening, then their interim head coach is going to be under a huge amount of pressure because he was brought in to make a quick change. And that's not happened. And he's also already hit I don't know if the panic button is the right word, but he's already started, criticising the players, saying that they lack quality to attack, to score, to sort of suffer and concede. So if you're already sort of firing shots at the players in public, and even that's not provoking a response, then it's a really dire situation.
Okay. David, Liverpool after Crystal Palace, then they've got Nottingham Forest and then Sunderland and Brighton. I mean, all those teams are in very strange form right now, but in better form than Tottenham. Could Tottenham actually beat the drop?
They could, of course, beat the drop. They've got enough quality there and they've got enough opportunities to do so. However, they've not won in 2026. The other teams are on better form than them. It's extremely worrying. I would say the run-ins of all 3 of those clubs, even maybe Leeds just above, are fairly similar in terms of opponents. There's a massive game on the 22nd of March between Tottenham and Nottingham Forest. I think that could be potentially pivotal in this relegation race. Of course, Tottenham's immediate priority is Crystal Palace, and if they get a win or even a draw out of that, there may be a bit of hope going into the Atletico Madrid game. They get a bit of a reprieve. European football, which has been some sort of salvation for them, not only this season but last as well, is turning into a bit of a carbon copy, but I'm not sure they'll win the Champions League like they did the Europa League. Listen, there'll be huge anxiety, worry, panic inside the club right up to the top, I'm sure, because they've not been in this position before. Last season, they were not threatened by relegation. They were down in a bad position and finished lowly, but they were clear of the bottom 3. They're not really now. It's precarious. They have some people or players who may have experienced struggles, but as a club, they haven't fought relegation like West Ham, Nottingham Forest, Leeds have. And I think that's quite an important factor in all of this. Many people have pointed out that in the same games that Tottenham have to play last season, I think they had an awful record. They lost most of them. So it's genuine cause for concern and alarm bells ringing. But I guess in theory, on paper, they're better than those 2, Nottingham Forest and West Ham and Leeds as well. But it's not on paper. Their best players are out injured, suspended. They're at a low ebb. I guess this has kind of been coming to an extent. I mean, when Daniel Levy left the club, they were Europa League winners. I'm not trying to gloss over what was a difficult run of years, chopping and changing of managers, some really questionable recruitment decisions, scrutiny over not paying big enough salaries to compete with the teams that they're expecting to compete with, chopping and changing of sporting directors. It's been a tumultuous roller coaster pretty much since that Champions League final. It started to go wrong after losing to Liverpool in Madrid. It was going wrong towards the end of that season under Pochettino, and the ruptures really started to emerge after that. And you could say it's a sort of delayed reaction to the stadium move. Initially, things looked okay in terms of stadium built, training ground built, team competitive, but it was like a DOMS for those fitness freaks out there. Delayed onset to muscle soreness. They had a bit of a lag, and
Where
and
did
then
that come from?
I don't know. I was at the gym this morning,
Yeah.
and I'm feeling a bit tender myself. And then I turn up and see us all dressed in black, like funeral attire for a Tottenham podcast. What's going on here? This was not a producer-led memo, I promise.
Oh, man.
And so yeah, it's really bleak. But just I guess you're conditioned by what you've come to know, which is Spurs as a Premier League team, Spurs as a highly competitive domestic and European force, and maybe confirmation bias makes you think that they will scrape through. And I'm inclined to say that they should just be all right. But I don't say it with much certainty or confidence. This is the ownership's responsibility, obviously, in terms of they're at the top of the tree. Everything that goes on their watch is their remit. Vivian Lewis, the daughter of Joe, in terms of Nick Buka, who's her son-in-law, they're the most visible and hands-on from what we're hearing. Must point out that they're not directors. They've not come through owners and directors test. Then you've got Peter Charrington on behalf of the family trust. You've got Vinay Venkatesham, chief executive, who's experienced in that role. He did it at Arsenal. You've got sporting director Johan Langer, who's done it at Aston Villa, and they've got to deliver now. The only sort of sympathy in this is that it's very early in their reign and post the Daniel Levy upheaval. They came out with these sort of bold pronouncements about winning more, investing in the squad, paying higher salaries. But unfortunately for them, the next window was a January. Januaries are not good for business. Barely any clubs do really good business. You saw Manchester City do a couple of good deals, but apart from that, it's tough. They really would have needed to get to a summer, a pre-season, a full off-season market. And if they get to that point in the Premier League with survival, they will look to rebuild, and we can come on to talk about some of that in a bit. But for now, it is just all hands to the pump. Immediate term, Tudor, they're going to be judged by that appointment. Huge questions being asked about it now. They were at the time. This isn't being wise after the event. But whatever the conversation, the discourse around it, they need to batten down the hatches, put on the tin hats, and grind out by hook or by crook some points, or they're doomed.
Yeah, Jay, David explains there just how it's unravelled since that Champions League final many years ago now, and we all remember that team. Incredible, obviously Pochettino in charge as well. Now let's look to the current. Let's look at where Tudor is. He comes in, he has two London derbies to kick off, Arsenal and then Fulham away. I mean, which was never going to be easy. Jack Pitt-Brooke has also said that, Spurs have forgotten how to win matches. Tudor doesn't have much time with this team. How does he turn this around in such a short space of time?
I think Tudor might have to abandon his principles to a degree. He's got this track record of using a 3-4-2-1 formation and being quite aggressive and basically having sort of two floating number 10s behind a central striker. And we've sort of seen him try to do that with sort of limited impact. I don't know if he has the players or enough players, because there are so many injuries, to sort of do that successfully. And certainly what's happened is you're seeing him use Archie Gray or Jed Spence at left wing back, and both of those players are predominantly right-footed, and that brings its own issues. So I think he might have to just go to a simple 4-2-3-1 or 4-4-2 system and put some of the players in their best positions, which sounds so simple, but we've seen Michael Carrick do that at Manchester United and have great success. I think he needs to rely on players who have been in this situation before, and there are a couple within the squad. You look at Dominic Solanke, spent a lot of time at Bournemouth, and I think in the 22-23 season, he scored quite a few crucial goals in April of that season to help Bournemouth stay up. Richarlison's heroics for Everton, I think it was the season before, 21-22. I think he scored 7 goals in 9 of Everton's final games that season to help them stay up, including a winner in a really big game against Chelsea. So you're looking for those characters, those leaders within the squad who are prepared to be selfless, to play through the pain, who are going to stand up and be accounted for. But I think the problem is their captain is suspended for tomorrow night's game against Crystal Palace. I think there are question marks over Mickey van der Ven. He looks very agitated when he's been on the pitch. Guillermo Vicario, the first choice goalkeeper, he's been erratic throughout the season. So there are some obvious people who have leadership potential or leadership abilities, but they've been underperforming. So I think to go back to basics, sort of highlight those players who have experienced relegation battles before and are prepared to sort of scrap. And also, I think some players within the squad need to sort of take a look at themselves. And I'm going to use Randall Kolo-Muani as an example. There's a World Cup in 3 months' time. If you are desperate to get in that France squad, which he will be, then you have 9, 10 Premier League games left and a couple of games in the Champions League to prove your point. You should not let that opportunity go to waste. I think players like him need to step up and need to take advantage of these games that they have left, because they don't want, even if Tottenham stay up, they don't want this on their CV that they were part of a Tottenham squad which massively underperformed.
David, and please follow on this, Jay. I wonder if Spurs are in such a sticky situation because the league, yet again, is so competitive. We've seen Wolves take points from Villa and also Liverpool, teams highly above them. Wolves are pretty much going to get relegated. There is no easy match in the Premier League moving forward, David.
There isn't. That's what we're seeing abundantly clearly as Wolves enjoy their little upsurge and they're playing with some freedom. Everybody's written them off. I think it's unlikely they will pull off the great escape, but when you see the quality of their performance against Liverpool, Aston Villa, Arsenal, you think, you never know, but certainly they can make things very uncomfortable for those above them, the Burnleys, West Hams, Tottenhams, Nottingham Forest and Leeds of this world. There's no room for complacency. I mean, I'm going to go back on something I sort of insinuated earlier. Tottenham being too good? No, absolutely not too good. They've got some players who are more than good enough to get them out of this situation. They have shown a togetherness and some performances, especially in Europe. At Manchester City earlier this season, they can be a top team in a way that those around them are probably not quite there yet. But if they're going to think that there are worse, we often say this, there are enough worse teams around a club to go down. Not in this case. They're very much in that mire. And I think the way they played at Fulham are a really good team, by the way. I think maybe I expected Tottenham to get a point there, maybe at best, not a win. Fulham have enjoyed a really good season. They've got a top coach. They're in a deliver now phase. They've got quite a few experienced and older players. They're going to need to rebuild somewhat in the summer, and the momentum that they've built and the opposite for Tottenham made that not a surprise. But it's almost like losing has become a habit now. When you see the uncertainty with which, say, Vicario strikes the ball, the dip in performance of players who were so dependable, like Van der Ven, the discipline of a captain in Romero, even those that were shining, Spencers of this world, not quite there. Conor Gallagher coming in at vast expense, transfer fee, salary, international player, Champions League operator with Chelsea and then Atletico Madrid. It's not had the desired impact so far, and they've got struggles at left back. Is Sousa ready for that? When they were recruiting him, I was always led to believe he might go out on loan. Well, he's being, at this stage of the season, you need players who can come in immediately. That's why they tried to sign Andy Robertson. It wasn't for the want of trying. They were in the market. They were active, but so much has combined to go against them, including themselves. I'm not letting them off the hook on that. Players even going a bit further back, the likes of Bissouma, top player at Brighton, vast expense, the outlay on him. We do have to consider the injuries. I don't think listeners will probably destroy me for this, but I can't think of a team that has been worse hit, and not all of them, soft tissue. There have been some impact injuries that are out of their control. However, there needs to be an overhaul in that medical department. I think they've made an appointment from City Football Group. Dan Lewington, he's now started. I don't know if that's been picked up everywhere, but he's now in position and responsible for sports science, medical, strength and conditioning. I know it's only a short period of time, but it's interesting, and you may say every interim manager or new manager who comes in after one was sacked says this, but one of Tudor's first priorities was fitness. Is there a problem there? Are they not in the right condition? That's a major concern going into such an important part of the season, and it needs to be rectified going forward.
Can I just chip in on a couple of things David said? So I'll start off with the medical department, because it's a really important point that basically for 3 years in a row, there's always some sort of churn at the top of the medical department. So it started when the former chief football officer, Scott Munn, when he was in charge, I think he arrived in 2023. He does this review of loads of different departments, including the scouting and the academy department. There were lots of departures there, but also the medical department. Long-serving team Dr. Jeff Scott leaves. And then I think the following summer, Adam Brett comes in from Brighton. Nick Davies, I think, comes in as head of sports science. They only last one season before they leave in the summer. Then Thomas Frank is appointed this summer. He brings in quite a few people with him from Brentford, from the nutrition side, the physiotherapy side, sports science side, medical side. So that amount of change in one department in 2 or 3 years is extremely unhealthy, because there's just absolutely no stability whatsoever in your processes. So that is one issue that Spurs have been juggling with for a period of time. And it's an issue which is costing Tudor, Frank and Postecoglou. And then if we go back on the strength of the league, we know Spurs struggled last season to cope with the Europa League and the Premier League. So how are they supposed to cope with the Champions League, which we all know is a more intense competition, and the Premier League? And I think the best way to sum this up is just look at their left-wing options at the start of the season. Son Heung-min, okay, he wasn't at his best last season, but for 9-10 years, he was one of the best wingers, best forwards in the Premier League, best players in the Premier League. So reliable, would get you goals out of nowhere. Spurs' left-wing options at the beginning of the season were Matisse Tell, Wilson Odobert, Richarlison can sometimes play there, Brennan Johnson can sometimes play there. Now, Johnson has his merits, but he's not on the same level as Son Heung-min, and that's why he left to join Crystal Palace. Odobert and Tell are very raw, unproven. They need a lot of game time to develop. So you've lost someone who was a captain in Son, but also a player with real calibre, and you've not replaced him properly. You could say the same with Harry Kane. You know, Dominic Solanke and Richarlison are good strikers, very different profiles. There are not that many players in the world of Harry Kane's level, if any. But Solanke and Richarlison haven't delivered the goal-scoring returns or anywhere near the goal-scoring returns for the money that was invested in both of them, I think 60 and 65 million pounds respectively. So there are so many things going on there. And then to bring it back one final time, look at how many people, and David said this earlier, have left Spurs in the last couple of years. So you've had Fabio Paratici serve as a consultant. He briefly came back as a sporting director. Then he's left. You've had Daniel Levy leave. You've had Scott Munn leave. You've had Donna Maria Cullen, who was a long-serving executive, leave. The sort of one remaining person from the last couple of years is Johan Lange. Now, what that means is you've had so many different executives sign different players for different head coaches. They've all gone. They've made decisions for different departments, and they're not even there to see what the repercussions of those decisions are. So it's just constant instability. So I do feel a little bit sorry for some people at the club, because it's sort of, what are they supposed to do? Like, should we actually be surprised by where Spurs are? Because when you just have that much going on, how on earth are you supposed to string consistent performances when the players are speaking to a different head coach every season? different sporting director every season, different medical department, different people in the medical department every season. It must be confusing, and that's why mistakes happen.
Jay presents brilliantly, as ever, a picture of carnage. 2025 was, apart from the Europa League success, awful for Tottenham in terms of the amount of churn. It's just not healthy. And when you see other clubs go through that, it tends to have like comparable results. Down the road at Arsenal, they have been through that sort of trauma of changes at executive level, upheaval at ownership level, mess on the pitch, and they were wallowing. They were down towards the bottom of the league. Mikel Arteta hauled them up. They weren't competing for trophies. The fans were unhappy with the ownership. We've seen similar situations, a bit more historically, at Liverpool at various times, at Manchester United, of course, Chelsea to a certain extent. There's a direct correlation. This permeates onto the pitch, and it's not excusing matters on the pitch because you can drill into performance and players and staff and so on. But it's a much broader, more holistic problem that's at play here. And, you know, you can look at the wisdom of extracting Daniel Levy at that moment. For right or for wrong, whatever you might think of him, his departure left a vacuum of leadership. He was all that however many hundreds of staff there had come to know in leadership. Some liked him, some maybe didn't. Some thought he was good, some thought he was bad. Same outside the club. People you speak to in European football hold him up as one of the top executives around. Fans, by and large, think the opposite. Fine. But how were they replacing in that sense? Where's the expertise to take them forward? Why at that moment? I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about that. And that made 2025, dripping into 2026, absolute chaos. And they need to scrape through to the summer because they've got others coming in. Jay didn't mention they're Raphael Mawson from Manchester City. So there's good things on the way. There's the potential to improve. There's this talk about, and I've touched on it twice now, being willing to pay higher salaries and wages because some of the players Jay mentioned wouldn't have been signed by the rivals who are competing for trophies. They get the better caliber of players. It might only be small incremental improvements, but it makes a big difference. They didn't manage to land a Semenyo. Oh, I actually heard they made the most lucrative salary offer to him, but for whatever reason, he went to Manchester City. Brian Mbeumo before that. And there are so many examples. Eberechi Eze goes to Arsenal. So if they do get through to the summer, there is an opportunity, a really good one, to actually build in the way that some of those other clubs I've mentioned did. But things in football can change quite quickly. There are a lot of good ingredients at Tottenham. The problem is, it's like just getting through to that point to be able to do it, and then they have to deliver. This is just survival mode now, and that should be their sole priority.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on because look, let's sort of try and understand what relegation could mean if the North London club do go down. We're not saying they will, but what could it mean? Because, David, you reported earlier this week that the majority of the playing squad actually have relegation clauses in their contracts. What does that actually mean, and what did you learn?
Yeah, there were some suggestions that there were no relegation clauses in the Tottenham contracts, which would have left them with one hell of a bill if they were to go down to the Championship. So naturally, we made our checks on this and found that wasn't the case. All of the contracts in the Daniel Levy era, whether it be new signings or renewals, certainly in the modern era, recent years, did have a provision put into the terms, bar none, from what I understand. Most of them in and around the 50% bracket. I'm sure there's some differences within there. But that, fair play to Levy and Rebecca Capelhorn, who's another departure that we didn't mention, Jay, which is coming up. She's going to the Premier League and Mawson's replacing her. That sort of future-proofed them a little bit, a safety net of sorts. So if they do go down into the Championship, I don't know about the more recent signings, say a Gallagher and a Sousa, but certainly prior to Levy's exit. And that means that the wage bill will come down in the Championship. There'll be bonuses that won't be paid, Premier League, whatever happens in Europe too. The only thing I would say around that is that some clubs, Newcastle, I think, in the Mike Ashley era when Lee Charnley was chief executive, they actually increased their wage bill when they went down in a bold effort, a bit of a risk to come back up, and it worked. So they didn't have cuts, I don't think, and it would have been extremely costly if they hadn't got back up, but they did, and that's not a terrible way to sort of think about it. But yeah, Tottenham will have some significant savings there. There have been some pieces written. I think there was one by Matt Law in the Telegraph and Tom Allnut in the Times, whether we've done anything yet on potential sponsors departing, not renewing contracts, Tottenham becoming a less attractive proposition. They'll obviously lose massively on television money, on the European money they get at the moment, the Premier League position money. They'll gain solidarity payments, but their revenues are going to be slashed spectacularly. Tottenham in recent times, their PSR has been fine. It's the cash flow that's been a bit of an issue. And so going down into the Championship is doomsday from a financial perspective. Now, because of these salary cuts, because of revenue streams, because of events at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, music concerts, NFL, and so on, they've got some wiggle room, I'm sure. It would need a Chris Weatherspoon or a Matt Slater or Jay to explain in more detail. But from a football and financial perspective, for a club of Tottenham stature, it's catastrophic. What was it, 1977? I mean, many of us haven't been alive without Tottenham being in the top flight. And so they better get their head around the possibility, because as we've discussed today, it's not fake. But and if it happens, you would imagine that they're well equipped to come back. And some clubs have used it as an opportunity to get things right, but that will not be Tottenham's preference at all.
Yeah, Jay, I'm just looking at this squad. Vicario, Porro, Udogie, Mickey van der Ven, Romero. And then if you look further up the pitch, Solanke, Kudus, Madison, Kulusevski, Simmons, Richarlison, even Gallagher. I mean, if these players leave, it could present an interesting market opportunity for other squads, because a lot of these players are actually in a decent point in their career if we're looking at their trajectory.
Yeah, I was loving the accents you were doing on a few of those names, by the way.
I'm just trying out here, bro.
We should have said, and I think because so many people have left Spurs or are joining Spurs that we forgot to say this, but obviously Paratici left and he was co-sporting director with Johan Lange, and Spurs are currently running the process to appoint Paratici's successors. We shouldn't forget that. So there's more change coming, and depending on who they're speaking to, those individuals will be thinking, how much influence am I going to have? And do I want to take over when this club are not going to be in Europe? Now, maybe that's the perfect time to make sweeping changes and really implement your vision. Or maybe you just think there's way too much chaos going on. I don't want to be anywhere near it. Going back to the players, obviously, I think it's fair to say the majority of them would want to leave. As you've mentioned, Gallagher, Solanke, Van der Ven, Romero, these guys are experienced internationals. You know, Romero's won 2 Copa Americas and a World Cup. He's not going to be playing Portsmouth or whoever away in the Championship next season, is he? I think the sort of more interesting question is who from that squad actually sticks around. Maybe a couple of the younger players do, but even people like Archie Gray. Archie Gray was tearing it up in the Championship with Leeds 2 seasons ago, so he doesn't need to go back there. David's reported before about Lucas Bergvall having interest from Aston Villa and Chelsea, and he's a player I'd seen before when he was playing in Sweden. He's a great talent. He's not going to be sticking around. So the further down that list you go, if the worst happens to Spurs, you're looking at 10, 15 players potentially leaving, which is crazy to say, but that's the situation they find themselves in. I should quickly say there is a really awkward scenario for Spurs where Brennan Johnson, the hero of their Europa League final last season, scores against them tomorrow night. I know Spurs fans are listening to me saying this, but I know Brennan Johnson hasn't had a perfect time at Palace so far, but Spurs fans still sing his name at games, and he's going to be there tomorrow, and he's going to be intent on sort of proving a point that the club shouldn't have let him go. And I just think that is, in terms of narrative, I just really wouldn't be surprised if that happens, if he scored like an 89th minute win. It would be horrendous if it did. It would be horrendous.
Don't do it, Jay. Don't do it.
And my final point on that, because Jay rightly picked up, they're in the process of looking for a co-sporting director to work with Johan Lange, whatever the title might be. That appointment is massive to try and get this recruitment show on the road, improve it. And they've got good personnel there. Rob McKenzie, obviously, is the head of recruitment. So it's not like they're novices by any means, but it needs to be at a higher level. Decisions like Brennan Johnson, whatever Spurs fans thought about him, was he because the Spurs are intent on trying to sell better. They haven't been the best-selling club. So they kind of were quite proud of this deal. A record signing by Crystal Palace. Was it the right player to be sold? Was it the right time to sell him? And how were they going to replace him? And I think they might make a different decision if they were put in that position again. Maybe they would have got through to the summer, for example. Somebody needs to get a grip of this. And Lange and Jay has and will be reporting more on this. It is known to be more sort of behind the scenes, very sharp on the data, the structures, the processes, help, running a club from a football perspective, the football expertise at hierarchy level. But Paratici was out in the market with his sleeves rolled up, and they know how to negotiate. They've got a contacts book like you wouldn't believe. Same with Berta at Arsenal and a few others around the market. Monchi, who was at Villa before departing. They love it. They are doing the talks, the meetings, diving in and out of hotels and conference suites, and pulling in favours and relationships are key. And I think Spurs will be looking for another figurehead like that.
All right, let's leave it there. Jay, David, appreciate your time, and also thank you guys for joining us as well. We'll catch you tomorrow. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.